Yo, what's cracking, folks? Welcome to episode number 25 of The Painter and the Pixie.
Yes.
I am your host, Jeremy Vassar, and as always, I am joined by your other lovely host, my wife, Serina Vassar.
Hi, everybody.
And bless you, Gus. Bless you.
Tight.
So in this episode of the podcast, Serina and I are talking about popular diets. I believe we're titling this "What You Eat Don't Make Me Shit."
Yeah. A discussion on popular diets.
Yeah. So we're going to go over paleo, keto, touch a little bit on vegan and
vegetarian,
carnivore diet, and a few other things, kind of giving a broad overview of those diets from Serina's kind of nutritional therapy perspective, and then also our own experience with kind of the diets we've experimented with and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. It's a good episode, guys. I think you'll like it. If you're curious about any of these diets, if you've heard about keto recently, take a listen. I think you'll get some good information about it. As we say during the podcast too, there is no one size diet fits all for everybody. So take a listen, see what sounds good to you, and experiment. Try it out. See how you do.
Yep. So without further ado, please enjoy episode number 25 of The Painter and the Pixie.
This is only the beginning.
All right, ready?
Ready?
What you're going to hear about today is nothing short of a miracle.
Well, I don't believe it.
Let's find out. Ready, set, go.
Yo, what's up, girl?
Hi, Jeremy. How are you?
I'm doing well. Hanging out, ready to record some top-notch podcasts with you.
It's going to be fun. I am really excited about our topic today, popular diets.
Yeah.
So much fun. I think that it's going to be a really good episode for our listeners.
We'll find out, folks. We'll find out. So we were chatting about this earlier, and how we kind of want to set this up. So we're going to start with the standard American diet and kind of contextualize a lot of how these other diets emerged, and kind of first we're going to look at the history of the standard American diet.
Like, how did we get here?
How does the kind of the state of food, how has it gotten to where it is right now?
Good idea. I like that.
And then we will kind of progress forward, from that.
Yeah,
So,
I think that's great.
I'm a big context guy, so I like giving people a little bit of history of how things are, and it takes some of the heat out of it. I know diet, and especially popular diets, can be a little charged, and I'll just say right off the bat, I'm not a huge fan of people getting dogmatic about pretty much anything. So Serena and I we're open to the science of things, and you have always said we're going to touch on things about bioindividuality.
Yep, the concept of bioindividuality.
Some of the diets we're going to talk about are good for a reason, a season, a lifetime. Some of them are therapeutic diets, so it's just kind of, we're not hardcore any one way. So I just want to kind of, we're not here to like upset anyone. We're just going to kind of
explore the territory a little bit.
Explore things, give you guys some insights from what we see, and then how we're kind of, So I think that's good.
I think that's good. I think to what you said, to kind of just continue your idea of bioindividuality, I firmly believe, and I believe that science shows this too, that there's no one size diet fits all for everybody for all time. So there are, some people do really well with one, some people don't, some people do better with another. So I'm here and you're here today to talk about, here are some options and here are some pros and cons and some things that we see for any of these diets that we're going to talk about. So, you can make some more informed choices for yourself.
Yeah. And you have more of the technical piece of things, being a nutritional therapist. So you've seen, kind of more the nitty gritty than I do, but I've seen with a lot of the athletes and stuff that I've trained with or been friends with, I see what kind of guys are using, girls are using in the sphere of training and high performance and that kind of stuff. So, but anyway, let's go.
So let's talk about the standard American diet.
Standard American. So, we're not going to go like all the way back to like 1776 when we declared independence, but America has always been an agricultural country, and when really we want to look at where the foods that we're currently eating now have kind of like evolved from.
Yeah.
One of the biggest changes was it used to be there used to be a lot less food available.
True.
once the Industrial Revolution happened and we went through a couple wars, particularly World War II, McDonald's started in 1940, and then it really got franchised in 1955 with Ray Kroc. That's kind of where he came along and started to franchise it and build it out. And that was one of the original, I believe it was one of the original food franchises, like fast food franchises. It was like kind of the OG.
Interesting.
So, and with that, as McDonald's expanded, it wanted to have a uniform food across the country and all of its franchises. So that mechanism of expansion and uniformity then led to like industrialized meat. So like factory farmed, concentrated, particularly for beef. And then they also fed into beef and chicken and pork, and those were all, that's really where factory farming of those animals really picked
Sort
up.
of really took off, yeah, because before that it was regular farms, and they had to source from other, more so than not.
More or less, you had like stockyards and like
right.
meat yards and stuff in like Chicago or some of the bigger kind of stockyards for beef and like a bunch of cattle. But the problem was, even when we got the Transcontinental Railroad, which was much earlier in like the 1800s, refrigeration was a big problem.
Yeah.
So you had technology kind of coming alongside. The infrastructure grew, particularly in the early 1900s in America with the advent of the car. So horse and buggy became
less and
less. That was not in the cities anymore. And then you also had the population centers started to condense. So cities became, and they always had been, but they started to have just more and more people. And so what you had was population rise and populations concentrating in areas like New York City, Philadelphia, like all the major cities. So then the food production had to go outside of the cities. It was no longer like you couldn't just have farms in the middle of New York City. There was no room for it. And then you had to feed all these people, these millions of people that were moving into the cities, who also generally weren't working in food. They were working in textiles and factories and things like that. So and then you had things like, McDonald's and other chains start to emerge. And really the appeal of McDonald's at the time was, this is when a lot of travel started getting more popular. People had more access to automobiles. There was the interstate, so people could travel coast to coast. You had things like Route 66 and all these famous highways. Well, what happened was if you were driving along, you'd stop at a diner and you didn't know if it was going to be good or not. So originally with McDonald's, you got the same thing every time.
Right.
And that's
very predictable.
Very predictable. So it gave people a way to travel and interact with travel where they could be very consistent in the experience because they know like, well, okay, it's a McDonald's. I know it. So I know it's good. And they're not going to roll the dice on going to a restaurant they don't know with their kids or whatever. So now you extrapolate that out till now. And we've had all these kind of iterations of this where franchises are widespread. They're kind of more popular than more mom and pop shops. Although you're getting a big kickback with Kraft and things like that now. Well, the industrialization of these meats means that, they needed to put out a crap ton of meat. They just needed a shit ton of it. So you've got factory farms, which are horrible, horrible conditions for these animals. They are not, in general, fed well. They're not fed the diet they were intended to eat. It's less optimal, we'll say.
Right. Well, and it's cheaper and it's easier, and you can control the variables. If all the cows eat corn, then they're all going to taste the same.
Right. And there's a lot of reasons they're trying to fat them up. A lot of times they're really heavily dosed with antibiotics and other hormones. Same with pigs and same with chickens. And it's just the quality of that food is not great. Particularly the meat's pretty nasty.
Yes. So I was going to say, though, even before we talked about, before this happened, this factory farming of meats, you talked about World War II. We had a lot of industrial influence on the food system then as well, because we had to make foods shelf stable. They had to be able to be shipped overseas or sent with soldiers and these things. That was really the beginning, not just this meat phase that you're talking about with factory farming, but we had a cultural shift from eating real food that spoils
Yeah.
to being preserved. We needed to help, and it's not being preserved with salt. That's
Right,
what they did for
right,
a
right,
long
right.
time. So you had to keep flours to be stabilized. So you had to take away the germ from the wheat. You had to take away some of those things. You had to create things like hydrogenated oils that would be shelf stable. They wouldn't be liquid. They'd be more solid so that you could mix it with things. You could let food last for longer
Yep,
and
yep.
longer periods of time. So that on top of this industrial revolution, we can say with meats, this meat revolution where they're doing these big giant factories, these slaughterhouses where their animals are not necessarily anymore eating what they were designed to eat. It's just what's convenient to feed them or cheaper or what have you.
Right.
Fatten them up more. So in combination, the food quality in general of the American diet started to decline.
Yeah, and you also had the advent of, even earlier, was Post and Kellogg starting to say that, we should be eating these cereals, and then they would
Yeah.
refine everything out, like you said, to make them more shelf stable, and then they would fortify them with vitamins and minerals and try and put some of the stuff back in there. And then that came along with a lot of, there's some interesting religious movements attached to that stuff. And
Yeah, and I believe Kellogg, when he started his cereal company, was terrified of fats. He thought fats would kill you.
Yep.
And was obsessed with having lots of bowel movements.
yeah, it was a lot of fiber.
A lot of fiber. And that's why he made his cereal, so that people, he would take people and he would have these retreat centers where they just would eat tons and tons of fiber, plant-based fiber, so that they would just have lots of bowel movements. And he thought that was the key to longevity. So, and then it became popularized. And
Yeah, he was an interesting guy because he was also
Very
trying
interesting.
to curb some, how should I say this? Some sexual desires with diet. It was very odd.
Yeah.
It was an interesting. It was wrapped up in a lot of other things too.
Yeah.
So we got, that's where you had the cereal. So like in World War II, we had to make food for the troops that were shelf stable, like you said, in MREs. My grandfather has all kinds of stories, or had all kinds of stories about what they had to eat when they
Yeah.
were over there. He was very happy to get to France because they had some better stuff. He said the British food was terrible. But yeah, and he was very happy also. Italy was great because he was in Sicily, fantastic
yes.
food there. And then France was great. And then when he was in Britain for a little bit before he went into Normandy,
Yeah.
which wasn't a pleasant experience, if anyone's seen Saving Private Ryan. Anyway, so we had a lot of, industrialization happening, and then a lot of the factories that made ammunition after World War II got into food production.
right.
And a lot of
they
it
were
got-
set up for mass production.
They were set up for mass production, and those jobs just switched over to like, oh, let's just make a bunch of food. And
everyone thought it was great because, the people culturally, we were getting busier and busier and busier in things that weren't farming. For a long time, humans
Right.
in general had to spend a huge majority of their time preparing the land, tilling, growing, tending animals, livestock, taking care of all of those things. And then with this advent of a new type of agriculture, we could spend more time on building buildings and learning and be in medicine and developing philosophical concepts and becoming a lawyer. You
Yeah,
didn't
well, it was-
have to spend so much time and energy doing food.
when you have population centers that start to concentrate, you get more specialization. So you get more people that know one thing really well instead of being like, if you're a farmer, you got to know a lot of stuff.
Right.
Whereas, we've worked up to the point now where someone can just know a very specific type of computer coding, and that's all they do. So there's a lot more niches set up, the more populous, like the more people there are. But what also happened is you had this drive towards convenience.
Yep. And the drive towards convenience, exactly what I was getting at.
And then you also had, because of the war, what happened too is the majority of the men, a lot of the men went overseas, either in the Pacific or in the the European front, and then a lot of the women ended up going into the workforce because
Yeah.
that's who was left,
Right.
and they had to, and their husbands were gone. A lot of times their children were gone, so they ended up working. And then when the men
home
came
to
back, when the men came back, they were like, "Okay, I want my job back," and the women were like, "We kind of like we're gonna not stop working." So then there was a drive towards convenience
And
and
prepackaged and ready to go and minute
Yeah.
meals and
like
the microwave.
pre-made like cake mixes and stuff. I remember my mom saying that my grandmother, Grandma Tootsie, she made everything from scratch, and then she talked mad shit on those the cake mixes.
Yeah,
She's
in
like, that's
boxes.
that's not real. Like that's garbage. Like, so, but it was this drive towards convenience. Then you had, keep fast forwarding, you had microwaves and the family meal became less and less of a thing.
It did.
Now, if you progress through the 1970s, 1980s is like the latchkey generation. You had a lot of single moms, a lot of like both parents working. And that's kind of stayed true from then on because housing prices went up. And if you want to live like, anywhere decent and not even that decent, you need like 2 incomes to be able to afford a lot of the housing. And then, all the other stuff we're supposed to be buying. So then there's less time, a lot of times we don't have stay-at-home moms are less prominent. And then there's just less cooking going on in general. So everything got convenient, and then cheap.
Cheap and quick.
And then shelf stable, and then Costco, these big box stores where you could buy, a lifetime supply of Oreos in one shot and never have to go back again.
Right.
So that type of stuff. So there's been a drive towards all this convenience, but what happens is there's, a lot of the processed food is very shelf stable, which is...
Well, what does it mean to have a processed food? It is no longer in its natural state so that it can become shelf stable or package ready or some of these things.
One, then in some of the more complex things, they have additives that keep it from
spoiling,
decaying and doing those types of things, and they refine anything that may decay out of it. So you end up with things that taste amazing because they've been engineered to hit your taste buds in a certain way. And then, I don't want to go too much into it, but you had the sugar industry.
Yeah, that was a big one too.
They, what's that dude's name? The case against sugar. Do you remember that book? Did you listen to it?
Yeah.
Okay. Serena will link it in the show notes as far as that author. I forget that name.
I'll look him up.
Your phone's on airplane mode.
Yeah, but I can still see my list of books.
Oh, okay. So they lobbied against fats and basically condemned fats as the reason for heart disease. And so they wanted to sell more sugar. And then the industrialized food industry started to just put sugar in everything.
Yep.
And then now we've got...
Well, and sugar was touted as like this magical substance. The doctors used to recommend that parents give their children a teaspoon of sugar before every meal to help stimulate healthy appetite.
Right. And we can put the author's name, and that's the name of the book. It's fine.
Yeah.
But I mean, even the sugar industry teamed up with tobacco, and they used to
Gary
sugar...
Taubes.
Gary Taubes. There you go. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So now we have an abundance of food, but there's not an abundance of healthy nutrition, really.
Yeah, there's an abundance of food, but a lack of nutrients. Nutrient density has been removed when you refine a food.
Yeah, and there's a lot of, again, our culture is centered around convenience. I believe America was where we invented, or where the drive-through got invented. So you're eating on the go. Parents are working several jobs. There's kids going to all these things now, and that's kind of where we are currently, where it's a very fast pace, particularly on the Northeast. And but now we're seeing kind of a reversal in that. But if you're eating the standard American diet, you're going to be eating a lot of processed carbohydrates.
Typically a lot of grain-based processed carbohydrates.
So, bread,
grain or potato,
bread from the store, pasta from the store, all that kind of, like any pre-made stuff, cereals,
granola bars,
Yeah.
oatmeal, those types of things, or like pastries. That's really popular for breakfast foods. Sandwiches, hoagies. That's really popular around here.
And then sugary drinks and soda and all that stuff. So
so I think there had been it's shifted more to getting energy, meaning calories, because a calorie is just a unit of energy. Right. So to getting a lot of calories, but with those calories you have a lot of energy, a lot of boost, right? A lot of energy density, for lack of a better word, but not a lot of nutrient density. So as Americans, we've had to eat more and more and more volume of things, higher amount of calories, higher amount of processed foods, because our bodies are still searching for those nutrients. Right? Those nutrients are not available, not as easily available as if you would have something that is not processed. So for example, what would be a good example here? If you had a fruit, like jelly on a sandwich, peanut butter and jelly sandwich. We'll use that as an example. You've got bread, we'll say white bread, maybe whole wheat bread, right?
Yeah.
So we've got bread, we've got processed jam, and we've got peanut butter. The nutrient value of that sandwich, the calorie value is going to be much higher than if you were to eat a quart of strawberries and a handful of peanuts, right?
Right.
So that's what I'm trying to get at here is that there's a big difference in the nutrient value when compared to the caloric load.
Right. So that's kind of the state of where our food supply is at right now. And because of this, a lot of, if you eat a lot of these processed foods, particularly that are chock full of sugar for a long, long time, we're seeing all these inflammatory diseases kind of, coming out of that, like diabetes, type 2 diabetes being one of them. Now we have a lot of childhood diabetes, which is directly linked to overconsumption of sugar. And there's a lot of other, people
And
have
poor ability to manage that blood sugar after you've consumed so much of it.
So you've got joint issues. We've got the obesity situation going on, which is pretty intense. And that that's not that's a newer thing.
Yeah, they call those the diseases of modern life or modern diseases rather than infectious diseases, right? Our ancestors often had to deal with things like measles and whatnot. That was more of an infectious disease, but this is a disease of modern life choices. They're usually long progressing, takes a long time for onset, and they take a long time to do some damage. We have talked about this before, and this might be a little bit outside the scope of our podcast here, but I'm going to say it anyway. We've talked about how there's, people are really upset with certain problems in our culture, like shootings and whatnot, which definitely are problems. People are dying, and that's not a good thing. But we have a huge epidemic. More people are dying or this drug overdose thing, this thing with opioids that's going on.
Right.
Huge amount of deaths associated with that terrible, awful thing. But we see more of a quick response from those types of factors. Whereas these diseases of modern culture, like diabetes, for example, we have a huge death toll, I believe diabetes is the highest cost from the government for any healthcare problem in the United States.
Yeah.
That's a far larger problem, but the death is so slow.
Yeah.
It just takes a much longer time to get to that end point that it's not a big focus. People aren't saying, hey, let's just see if there are other factors. Can we recover from this from a different vein? Can we say, let's change diet and make things better? No, just take this medication and keep doing what you're doing. Right? So there's less of an urgency there. But I think should be urgency because we don't want to have all this major cognitive problems and degenerative disease if we don't have to.
Well, they're chronic in that it takes a super long time for the symptoms manifest pretty quickly, depending on your genetics too. But then it takes a while to kill you. It's not super fast.
Right.
But it also is degrading the quality of your life the whole time that you're feeling like, and a lot of people don't know that they feel poorly until they start eating well, and they're like, holy crap, I feel way better.
Or they associate it with aging. That's what I've seen a lot of in my office. So many clients have said to me, oh, well, I just have bad memory because of my age, and they're in their 50s. Like, no, it's maybe, and then they quit a lot of the extra sugar, a lot of the processed foods. They go back to more of a whole, real food, not whole foods like the store, but whole food-based diet, and their memory comes back. And they're like, this is amazing. I feel like I'm 20 years younger.
Yeah.
So diet has a role in that too. So that's kind of summary of the standard American diet. Often we have a whole lot of processed carbohydrates from grains. We've got a lot of processed meats, heavily processed meats that are not the same quality as you would get from a natural source of meat. A cow that eats grass all day long is different. The meat quality is different than a cow that is in a feedlot filled with fear and anxiety and stress,
living
and
in its
eating
own
grain.
manure. Yep.
And they grind up. Sorry for people listening if this is sensitive. They grind up dead animals and feed it to the other animals who are not animal eaters, right? They're what is it called? Herbivores. Oh my gosh, omnivores. The only word that would come to my head, herbivores. And so that's not okay. That's a completely different experience of food than eating something that you would find it in nature.
Yeah.
A lot of processed milk products too. It's the same thing with milk products. And I say milk products because what you buy at the grocery store, 2% skim milk, whatever, from the grocery store is not the same thing as milk that comes from a cow. That's a milk product.
Yeah. Well, it's been homogenized. They've burned out they've boiled out all of the healthy enzymes that are in there, and it's...
Yeah, and you have to, when you have a conventionally raised dairy product like that, you've got to pasteurize it or else you're going to for sure get some sort of nasty microbes.
Well, particularly
Absolutely.
when you're milking on the scale that they're milking, it's not the same as if you had a really nice cow that you milked in your back pasture, and then
who's really well cared for.
Right.
And
the health of the cow,
has
all that
a calf
stuff.
that gets to be a real calf. It's not artificial. That's how they do that when they have these milk products.
You got to trick the cow.
Well, we're not going to get into that dairy industry. So I can go down that rabbit hole really hardcore, and I'm not going to do that right now. But I think this is a nice lead up to our next level, what we're going to talk about as far as diets go. I have my little list of diets to chat about.
But I'll just say, we kind of just covered the more or less the state of things. Now, the response to this, culturally right now, in this, as we're recording this in 2018, there has been a kind of slew of diets that have emerged. I mean, diets kind of go in and out over the years anyway. And there's been the Mediterranean diet, the Atkins diet, and right now what's kind of hot is Paleo. So Paleo, we're going to go over Paleo, Keto, vegan, and then Carnivore are kind of like
plant-based. We're going to talk about Atkins. We're talking a little bit about Weight Watchers. We're going to kind of touch on a lot of these popular places. Now, I think too, to be fair to our culture, a little bit more fair, is a lot of times people in general don't know the long-term effect until you've had a long-term study. And all of these processed foods, there really hasn't been enough time. Now we've had several generations where we can say, wow, I think that these processed foods have been negatively impacting our bodies, our cultures on the whole. And thankfully, we've got a wonderful turnaround here. There's a lot of people who are saying, hold on a second, I think that our ancestors were onto something when they ate real food and they didn't pump it full of chemicals and preservatives and these types of things.
Yeah. And I also, I'm on board with, we're not condemning any one thing. I don't want to, there has been some nefarious activity in certain industries. We're not going to focus on that, but a lot of times you don't know until you know.
Right.
And now our culture has kind of looked around and be like, hey, I think a lot of what we're doing is not great. They've linked, a lot of these inflammatory,
degenerative
disease like Alzheimer's and stuff to diet. So it's not just like, oh, what's happened? It's like, no, we're getting pretty close to understanding that these are having a really negative long-term effect. So then there has been a counter to the standard American diet, and then that's kind of what we're going to talk about now, the ones that are kind of in the current mainstream.
Right.
But again, a lot of times you don't know until you know. And you know what? If the standard American diet worked out, it would have been great. Like if convenient and we're shifting to have convenient food that is also nutrient dense.
Yes.
So there's that shift as well. But
because we have to look, and we're not in the podcast here, we're not trying to propose a solution to this problem. It's just bringing awareness and understanding, just kind of opening the conversation topic for people, because frankly, some of this mass production of food was needed. We had so many people.
Right.
So there's been an argument against that too,
and there's still an issue of, some of these diets are less accessible to people,
for sure,
particularly based on income,
and availability,
because we have the world population is close to 8 billion right now. It might be over 8 billion. I haven't checked in a little bit. We got to feed all these people. So
somehow.
So
how do we do that in a more effective way? That's not what we're talking about here, but we're just talking about here's some other diet options.
Yeah. So let's kick things off with Paleo.
Paleo. So what is a paleo diet? Paleo stands for Paleolithic. That's like the nickname for it, which most people are familiar with, but just in case, define our terms. The paleo diet is basically a turn to try to go back to what ancestral mankind ate before we had these processed foods. What did Paleolithic man eat? Because there's not a lot of evidence to show that these types of people, Paleolithic man, had any of these degenerative inflammatory diseases. So that's kind of, to me, paleo is really close to saying eat real food. If you're my client, if you have heard me at all on any of my videos, I always talk about eating real food. Real food is something that you find growing in nature, grazing on the grass, something that has been very minimally touched by mankind's hands, because any food that we eat, generally speaking, as a population, has been processed in some way. If you're eating a salad of spinach, you've picked the spinach, you've watched the spinach.
Yeah.
Technically, that's processed, right? You've done something to it, but you're keeping it as close to how you'd find it in nature as possible. So paleo typically does not include any grains. The argument is that Paleolithic man were not agricultural peoples, they were hunter-gatherers. So you wouldn't really hunt and gather grains. And if you did, it would be minimal, be wild grown.
Yeah, the paleo is a little, from an historic standpoint, it's not quite accurate to the diet because there's a lot of evidence that they were cultivating small batches of wheat and making breads, but they were highly fermented.
After the Paleolithic period.
No, during Paleolithic. So widespread agriculture was not a thing,
Yeah.
but they did find patches of wheat that they would process into bread-like products, but they weren't eating like Twinkies and stuff like that.
And that's fine. That's where I think it's
almost always they were highly fermented, like sourdough type breads.
It's the only way you could do it back then without
Yeah.
levels of processing we have now.
Yep.
And
Yep.
mills and these types of things.
Right.
So generally speaking, a paleo diet consists of whole animal products, meats, cheeses, dairy. Actually, some of them don't even include dairy in the traditional paleo diet, but paleo diet as we talk about it in a modern perspective. But you're basically just eating ancestral foods, fruits, vegetables, nuts and seeds.
Yeah, nuts and seeds. Mm-hmm. So, and then the big exclusions are, I think, do you still do maple syrup and honey? Is that part of it? But it's usually restricted a little bit. And different people have different protocol. Mark Sisson has the primal blueprint. And it's like his primal diet because he thinks the primal's a little bit more
of an accurate term.
Yeah, because he kind of listed off the same things I just said about the paleo word, and it also becomes kind of a charged thing. Like people are like, is this paleo?
Yeah.
So, and what I have seen, a lot of there was particularly a couple years ago, a lot of guys doing CrossFit and gals were doing paleo. That was a big kind of like.
Yeah, Rob Wolf was a big proponent of that. He was into CrossFit way early on and into paleo as well.
Yeah. And then as he started to, because I know paleo is particularly restrictive of high glycemic carbohydrates.
Yeah,
and
grains and legumes are kind of off the list. They said that would not have been a typical staple of the diet.
Yeah.
From Paleolithic era. So they eat some roots, shoots, tubers, vegetables, fruits, meats, those types of things. Eggs are totally acceptable on that type of diet. And I think that's great. That works well for people. Most of those foods are whole foods.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Whole things that you would find in nature.
Right. So, and then do you have, like, who do you think that diet is good for?
Generally speaking, most people do great when they move to a more paleo type diet.
Yeah.
Because, not necessarily because there's something magical about that diet, but because you've removed a lot of the high glycemic refined carbohydrates. High glycemic means having a high sugar impact in the bloodstream.
Right.
And junk foods, basically. A lot of these diets work well for a lot of people because you're removing a lot of those components.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to make because almost all the diets we're going to talk about, one of the biggest pieces of it is what is
not in it.
What is excluded from the diet, so what people remove. And I even know, like, there's no beer. There's very little, like, there's no paleo beer that I'm aware of. Maybe
because
someone's
it's made from grain.
Maybe someone has
Wines are acceptable.
Yeah, there's a couple wine companies that do paleo wine. I know Mark Sisson's a big fan of some of those. He might even have a wine company, but I don't remember. So, I'm not sure if they do hard liquors or not, but I know there's paleo wine for sure. So, but if you're restricting, like, the beer and all of that stuff, and you're not eating pizza and all this kind of staples in the American diet, that you're definitely going to see some results.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, when you go back to eating foods that are more of a whole food or a real food, if you know what it is when you look at it, you don't have to look at a list of ingredients. Right? There is no list of ingredients. Your ingredients are your food.
Yeah.
Right? Then you're going to get a much higher level of nutrient density. Right? In general, no matter which diet program you ascribe to, you're going to get a more nutrient dense version of food.
Yeah.
So I like paleo. I would say generally speaking, that's kind of what we do for the most part. I don't like giving a label because it's not consistent all the time. It's not always that's how we're eating.
Right.
Because we do dip into other things and eating some junk food from time to time.
Oh,
I mean,
for sure.
I for one love a good little treat of beer and potato chips, right?
Yeah. Dude, it's one of the finer things in life.
And see, that's because we live in the real world.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah, it's all right.
You don't have to be super restrictive all the time.
We could talk about what we eat kind of maybe towards the end.
Yeah, we'll do that towards the end.
We should do that at the end.
So let's talk here. The next kind of step from paleo that people often get into is keto.
Keto's a big one right now, man.
Keto is super popular right now.
Super big one right now.
Yeah, the keto diet stands for ketogenic. Now let's take a step back. what is keto? What does that mean? Ketogenic means you're burning fats primarily as your fuel. When you digest food and absorb nutrients into your bloodstream, any carbohydrate, now a carbohydrate is any fruit, any vegetable, any grain or grain-based product, crackers, cakes, cookies, sweets, breads, pastas, those types of things, and any sweetener.
Yeah.
Those are all, chemically speaking, carbohydrates. Most of the time people think of carbs, they think of bread, pasta, that type of thing. Those are carbohydrates, but from a chemical perspective, any celery is a carbohydrate.
Yeah.
Any plant-based product is a carbohydrate. So carbs convert into your bloodstream, they convert into glucose, which means sugar. Fats break down into something called ketones. So a ketogenic diet means you're focusing primarily, you're teaching your body that your primary fuel source is from fats, from ketones, rather than carbohydrate or glucose, sugar. So a keto diet is basically high fat, super duper low carb, and moderate amounts of protein. Moderate to low amounts of protein. Because protein eventually will actually break down into glucose in the body if there's a perceived need for extra glucose.
Right.
It's a process called gluconeogenesis for any of those who want to take notes. So paleo, we'll contrast these two real quick. Paleo has a really nice balance between fats, carbohydrates, and proteins.
Yep.
It's higher fat than a typical American diet, maybe, because some American foods, some standard American foods can be really, really high in poor quality fats.
Yeah.
Right. Did you have something you wanted to say there?
No, I'm just, I just wanted to talk a little bit more about keto.
Yeah.
That was,
So the ketogenic diet was originally developed, and I should have looked his name up, I forget, by a doctor who used it to help children with seizures. With epilepsy. He discovered it used to be years ago that the standard treatment for children with epilepsy or who had seizures was to starve them.
Yeah. Okay.
They just couldn't eat food because they found that when they didn't eat, their seizures were improved.
Right.
And along came this doctor, and I'll link his information in the notes. His name is escaping me at the moment, but he came along and said, well, okay, if you're starving them, what's happening physically in the body is they're moving into a state of starvation ketosis, where their body has to then burn their own fat for fuel.
Yeah.
So he said, well, why don't we just feed them fat? They can still eat. Just feed them fats and exclude carbohydrate/glucose from the picture. And you know what? It worked beautifully. It worked fantastically well. Tons of people were able to live normal, healthy, wonderful lives eating high fat. What he had found was there was some sort of component with that glucose firing messages in the brain incorrectly, which would cause these seizures. And then when you used fats for fuel for the brain rather than glucose, the seizures didn't happen.
Right.
Then they had the advent of seizure medications to control this, and they said, okay, you can eat whatever you want. You don't have to be the oddball out in society by eating this weird diet.
Right.
And you'll be okay. So then the keto diet kind of fell to the wayside and really, really picked up steam with the Atkins diet. The Atkins diet is a modified ketogenic diet focused on primarily burning fats for fuel and having a really low carbohydrate. Or if you eat carbohydrate, you super high dose yourself with fiber, because what they found was if you have a lot of carbohydrate in the bloodstream or carbohydrate in the body and you had a lot of fiber, the fiber kind of cancels that out. That's what the concept of a net carb is. For those of you who are listening, and maybe you don't know, even Jeremy, you probably know, if you have 15 grams of carbohydrate in a food and you've got 10 grams of fiber, you've got 5 grams of net carbohydrate.
Okay.
Right? So total carb minus fiber is net carb. So the Atkins diet sort of focused on keeping your net carbs really, really low and increasing your fats.
Yep. Yeah.
And it worked really great for a lot of people. A lot of people lost a ton of weight doing the Atkins program and balanced their blood sugar and stabilized a lot of things because they shifted their body's ability to focus on burning fat for fuel. Now, it's my opinion, perspective here in the nutrition world, that our body should be adaptive. If you want to look back at that paleo perspective, what did you have? You had periods of feasting and periods of famine. And when you're in famine, you've got to be in fat burning mode. You've got to be in nutritional ketosis. To burn off your reserves. But you also want to be able to burn carbohydrates when they're part of the picture. Right.
And one of the big kind of benefits from the ketogenic diet is hugely anti-inflammatory.
Yeah.
Because you're not, there's like little to no sugar.
And sugar can be quite inflammatory.
So your insulin's not spiking, like blood sugar's not jacked up all the time. It's not yo-yoing through the high glycemic carbohydrates all day. I will say too, if I'm pretty sure I know exactly you're about to touch on this, but if you are been doing a diet that's more like the standard American diet, that's very high in processed carbohydrates, and switch
typically low fat,
because that was
the fad for a long time.
Going back to what the sugar industry did, they intentionally lobbied to demonize high fats. There was a lot of garbage studies.
Yeah.
They were very skewed based on who was funding them to make high fats the enemy, and that's where you saw a lot of low fat diet whatever come onto the marketplace. And whenever if you had full fat yogurt, when they made it diet or low fat or whatever they called it, they just chalked it full of sugar.
Right. Well, if one of the roles of dietary fat is to make our food taste good, and if you remove that from the yogurt, you've got to add something else that tastes good back into the picture, and that's where the sugar comes in.
So a lot of products had the fat pulled out and sugar pumped in, which now we know is super not good. But when you go over into keto, if you're really used to being a carb burner, they're just talking about, because I've done keto, you've done keto, we've done paleo, we'll get to where we are now, but with keto, it can be a little bit of a rough entry if you go right into it.
Or dangerous. Or actually dangerous.
So if you're just going into... Now, when I went into keto, I had been eating a lot of healthy fats because I was already together with you, and we were, doing our thing.
Had removed a lot of the processed carbs and the processed foods in general, not just processed carbs.
So to me, it was a slight adjustment on the dials, and then not cheating as much with like ice cream and other things that I enjoy. But
indulging
it. I still like cheating because that is drilled into my brain. I will always think of cheat meals as cheat meals. That's where like the keto flu, people talk about that, where like they just feel like garbage, particularly athletes. I know some guys that keto's gotten really popular in a lot of different avenues because a lot of the CrossFit people have gone from paleo into, and workout folks in general have gone from paleo to keto and seeing if like, can I be fat adapted so that I don't, I'm not eating all these carbs all the time. And even in like the world of running, there's been a lot of ultra marathoners that are now fully keto.
Yeah,
but
that makes sense.
But a lot of guys tried it and then did not do well with it. So and what happens is there's the runner that set. He was just on Rogan a little bit ago. He's an ultra marathoner. He set the record for. He ran a 7-minute mile pace for 100 miles.
That's insane.
And he's keto like most of the time in his training, but when he's got big races, he's got to add he's got to add
glycogen, glucose,
some good carbohydrates in there.
Yeah.
So he's not eating like Snicker bars and stuff, but he's adding like good carbohydrates, like, sweet potatoes and that kind of stuff back in because you just need that boost. And I've noticed guys, when I was on keto, rolling jiu-jitsu, anything where I had to do like fast twitch stuff, I was slower off the line. And one of my buddies is doing it right now. And he was saying, he's just like, man, I just don't feel as like sharp when you're rolling.
It's a different method of burning fuel for the body. It's just about burning fuel differently. Yeah. And I like what you said. That's exactly where I was going to go is when you're not used to eating high fat diet, it's rough. It's a very rough entry for several reasons. One, your metabolism doesn't know what to do with that. Your metabolism is the way that you burn energy. That's how I like to think about it. Is you get nutrients from your food. That's your fuel. That's how you stoke your fire, right? And your metabolism is the process by which you burn that fuel.
Yeah.
So if you're used to burning carbohydrates, which are super easy, very, very simple to burn. You've heard this if you've heard our shows before. You've heard me give this analogy. It's like the kindling on your fire. Burns super, super quick.
Yeah.
Really big burst of energy. And if you're used to getting a lot of little bursts of energy to keep you going throughout the day, just putting logs on top of that kindling it's what's going to happen. The fire's going to go out. It's going to take a while for your body to learn how to burn those logs. That's your fats. Yeah. To keep yourself going. Now, the other factor that is significant that people don't think about or they don't even know to entertain as a thought is, can I digest these fats in the first place?
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about this during our digestion episode 18. You need to have extremely awesome, stellar bile function liver, gallbladder, bile function to be able to digest and absorb those fats. Otherwise, you're going to be clogging systems. You're going to be holding on to it differently than you want to, or having some of those moments where you have to run to the bathroom. Right? Right?
Well, that's super common with, again, some athletes that I know, because if you go into keto, you're going to hear about emulsified MCT oil and
Or
coconut
even
oil.
regular MCT oil.
And then guys will put that in their smoothies, and it's really easy to then have disaster pants and shit your pants. So that's
right. And what that tells you is I'm not absorbing these fats. They're on a one-way ticket. Like, get out of here as fast as possible. This is overwhelming. So a lot of people go into keto right now and they think, oh, this is great. I'm going to lose weight. All these wonderful testimonies online. But you have to make sure you can digest those fats first. It's super, super important. I don't, as a nutritional therapist, I don't ever put anybody on. I've put very few people on a ketogenic diet specifically for a therapeutic purpose. Some people do great with it long term. Awesome. That's fantastic. They can digest fats and utilize them well. I'm probably more on a keto sort of program than I would typical person would be, meaning burning more fats, having a higher amount of fats in my diet than I do carbohydrates or protein.
Yeah.
But I would not say I'm strict to keto, not anywhere close to that. But I also know my body knows how to burn those fats. It used to not be that way.
Yeah, I definitely feel way more fat adapted.
Fat adapted. I love that.
Because I look at it, you use your fire analogy a lot with like build it. And if, what episode did we talk about that?
18.
Was it digestion?
19. We talked about indigestion and then blood sugar in 19.
Blood sugar. Okay. So one of the things I like to think about with people burning fat versus carbohydrates is like carbohydrates would be like gas in a car, and then fat is like electric.
Oh, okay.
So
that's a good one too.
Where I like to end up is being a hybrid.
Yes.
I want to be able to burn both because each fuel source has an advantage.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I love that analogy.
It's not a one-to-one because I'm not saying like gas is better than electric or electric's better than gas. I'm just saying it's nice to be able to burn both because fats can last you a really long time, but a lot of times that gas is like that quick, like bam. To be able to like hammer down and do that. Now you want your body, you've said you want it to be able to switch over easily and be fat adapted and carb adapted. And I think it's more dangerous to just only work on carbs. You want to be able to process both. So
you want to be able to process both. The high carb diets have a tendency to lead to things eventually more like diabetes, blood sugar dysregulation problems, or even hypoglycemia or reactive hypoglycemia. These types of blood sugar dysregulation issues when you're high carb because you're continually taxing that blood sugar balancing system.
Yeah, and I will say that even with athletes, particularly endurance athletes, whom I'm familiar with, a lot of them are heavy into high glycemic carbs because they're really, if you race a lot and you run a lot and you bike a lot and you do all these things, you're going to get into like shock blocks and gels and which are a lot of like straight up sugar and these things that you add into your water that are all like quick burning carbohydrates. I mean, if you run an ultra marathon or any kind of marathon, a lot of times they have these weigh stations that are set up and they're bowl full of M&Ms.
Yep.
And people drinking soda and stuff like that.
Sodas everywhere, and M&Ms, candies.
And like you see it catch up with guys. Like a lot of marathoners, they have like heart attacks, and a lot of them actually. I didn't know this, and then I found out that like a lot of runners are actually like diabetic because of how much they've been jacking up their blood sugar and insulin because they're eating all the sugar while they're running. And a lot of people think that I'm just burning it off. But you still have that insulin response.
You still have that response in the process of burning it for fuel, Now, and that's why I like to say to be adaptive. You want to be able to burn fats when you've got fats, and you want to be able to burn carbs when you've got carbs.
Yeah.
That's the caution I want to offer when somebody's considering doing a keto or high-fat diet. If you're not working with a health practitioner or nutritional therapist who can help your body make sure that your body knows how to handle that fuel, go at it very carefully. Be very careful. Be mindful. Go slowly. You don't want to shock your system. You don't want to go from extreme one end to extreme the other end. Yeah. It can be very taxing on your system.
And I will say just the advantages of keto that I've seen that I know with the science, if people want to have some more information about it, I would say like Wired to Eat's a great resource, very balanced.
By Rob Wolf.
I also think there's been several podcasts with Peter Attia.
Oh yeah, that's a good one too.
Or no, it's he's good, but who's the other guy? Dom D'Agostino.
Yeah, Dom D'Agostino.
He's been on with Tim Ferriss a couple times.
Keto.
He's been on with Rogan. So there's some good ones there if you really wanted to get into like the science of it, but there's a lot of, so let's just say best case scenario, if you are executing the ketogenic diet well, what it's really good for that I have seen is regulating blood sugar,
Yep.
losing weight. You're definitely going to lose weight because your body's going to be burning off your own fat as well.
Not quite.
A lot, well, if you do it,
Qualify that.
if you are probably,
If you are in fat burning mode, you're in keto. I completely agree with you, but I want to put a qualifier out there because you can go hardcore keto and gain 30 pounds. You still have to have a little bit of a calorie deficit. Your body needs to know how to burn fats. And once it's used to burning fats that you eat dietarily, it's going to burn stored fats much more easily.
right. And I will say what I saw is that when you're eating keto and you eat the amount of fat that is kind of recommended for your body type and whatever, you're more easily satiated.
Yes.
Because fats are very filling.
Much
so
more dense.
even when you're quote unquote like restricting calories, it doesn't feel nearly as restrictive as when you go on some of the old fashioned like calorie restrictive diets.
Right. And then that's exactly why it works. I totally agree with you.
It's to me, if I was really inclined to like lose weight quickly, I would do super strict keto. But that's because I know how to pull it off.
Yeah.
I have a tremendous resource in you to make sure everything's going smoothly, and also it's not my first rodeo, so I've done it before, and I know I'm fat adapted, and it's very easy for me to switch over to that mode. I know I'm like kind of in a hybrid situation now.
Right, because when you shift over into full-on ketosis, your body's looking for fats for fuel rather than carbs. So what happens is if you're not eating dietary fats at the moment, first of all, second of all, I said first of all already, you're right, you feel more satiated. Fats, one of the roles of dietary fats is to signal our brain to be satiated, right?
Yep.
So if you feel good and you feel full and your blood sugar is stable and you've got good energy and mental clarity throughout the day and your hormones are more well balanced because you need those dietary fats to create healthy hormones in the first place, you're going to feel stable. You're not going to need to eat as much volume of food, first of all, because fats are a lot more dense. More than twice as dense as carbohydrates or protein.
Yeah.
And your body's going to say, oh, I'm used to burning fats. Let me get some fats I've got out of storage and burn those too. It's used to that process.
Yep.
That's why it works so beautifully for people who need to lose a lot of weight. If you can get into being fat adapted, awesome.
Yeah, it's also we're going to touch on this probably towards the end here, but to do intermittent fasting on a ketogenic diet.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing.
That's clutch, and that's how you can really burn off some fat and some body mass without kind of suffering all
feeling
too much.
like horrible.
Right. All right. So now we're gonna touch on the. Were we gonna hit any other ones? The Weight Watchers. Are we doing that before?
Yeah, I think I want to touch on Weight Watchers real quick.
I've kind of heard good things about Weight Watchers recently. I know they revamped it. They have you can correct me if I'm wrong, but they have a new app that you can scan your food and it gives you the point totals. And now they're including healthy fats. Most healthy fats don't have any points to them. Eggs have 0 points.
Wow.
So they're really like, they're kind of moving more towards a healthy fat based thing. So this is just hearsay that I've heard on podcasts. I haven't really looked into it too much. I know Weight Watchers is largely counting calories, but now eggs have 0.
Right.
They're less
restricted.
Yeah.
That's great. I had not heard that actually. So typically what Weight Watchers is a fun way to restrict calories, because to dispel a myth, there's a popular myth going around right now that calories don't matter, like in the alternative health world, and that's just wrong.
Well, that's interesting because when I entered into the space with you and when we started on our journey together, it was a lot of like telling people you can basically eat as much as you want as long as it's from high quality nutrient dense food sources. And then
which is true.
Yeah.
That is still a
true
statement.
You can still put on weight doing that.
Yes. Yeah. And I actually have had a few clients that I can think of who have gone from standard American diet to more of like a paleo-ish, keto-ish diet and have gained 30 pounds and they're upset. And I say, well, what should happen when things are functioning perfectly well in your body and your brain and you're really in tune with yourself is you're going to eat when you're hungry, you're going to stop when you're full. But when you eat nutrient-dense food, higher fat foods, less processed foods, there's more calories packed into a smaller package. right?
Right.
So what should happen is you eat food and you're eating less volume. If you go to this type of diet and you still eat the same volume of food as you were on a standard American, less dense diet, you're going to gain weight. You are going to not necessarily reach your weight loss goals, because you do have to be aware that those foods still have calories, right? They still have density to them.
Yeah.
So if all is going according to plan, counting calories don't matter. That doesn't matter in and of itself, because you should be doing it automatically with your brain to begin with. Does that make sense? Like you should know, I'm hungry, I eat food. I am not hungry, I'm full, I don't eat food.
Yeah.
The problem comes into play when we get back to this cultural societal norm of, well, you should be eating 5 small meals a day. You should be eating 3 meals a day. Skipping lunch or skipping breakfast is bad. Don't do that. You're going to ruin your blood sugar, quote unquote.
Yeah.
That's when those other myths or points of view enter your brain while you're eating nutrient dense food. That's where we get ourselves into trouble, because what happens then is you have someone who is eating a really, really healthy nutrient dense diet, and they eat breakfast. They come to lunch, they do their workout, whatever, they come to lunch and they say, well, I'm really not that hungry, but I know I should eat lunch. I know I should eat this. And so then they eat an extra 500, 600, 700, 800, 900 calories at that meal that they don't need.
Yeah.
Right? So calories still matter. They just don't matter in the same way as they did historically, which was like being afraid of them.
Yeah.
Calories are the enemy. They're not the enemy. You just need to have a good relationship with them to understand what they're doing in your body and how they're helping you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So calories do matter, and eating when you're, I always say this, eat when you're hungry, stop when you're full.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't think we need to spend any more time on Weight Watchers, but we can move forward into our last 2 diets.
Yeah. The only thing I want to say, I do want to say something about Weight Watchers real quick, is that it's a fun way to watch what you are eating, but the things that rub me the wrong way about Weight Watchers, there's 2 major ones. One, it creates this obsession with food. You have to count all of your calories. You have to find your points. You have to stay within those categories. So that I don't like that very much. And 2, historically speaking, it was excessively low fat.
Yes.
Extremely low fat. And I want to say that works. Weight Watchers works for people to lose weight. It's just not very sustainable. And the reason being, when you go to extremes like that, is your body becomes less adaptive. And the whole goal for me is to remain as adaptive as possible, or regain that adaptivity.
Right.
When you stick with high carbohydrate focus, low fat focus, your body then becomes sluggish and unable to burn fats. That's one of the big factors. If you don't eat enough healthy fats, your body, your bile, right? That's the liquid that digests your fatty acids, becomes really thick and viscous and can't digest your fats. The 2 factors I tell people all the time in my office, if you don't eat enough healthy fats, so low fat, or if you eat poor quality fats, that's going to affect your body's ability to digest fats in general. So that was the really big beef that I have always had with Weight Watchers, is for a long, long time, it was low fat, low fat, low fat, don't eat any fats. And then when, humans go back to eating a typical type of diet, they gain a ton of weight because their body doesn't know what to do with those fats anymore.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I'm glad to hear that there's some positive momentum, some shifting there.
I've heard,
if that's true, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Go them.
And I'm not super up on, obviously I have no intention of ever trying that, but, because people are having to respond to this. There's so much science behind healthy fats now, and the sugar industry's kind of been exposed for what it is. There was a very, prominent New York Times article that kind of exposed a lot of this, and Gary Taubes has been very active as well. So anyway, I'm going to touch on these last 2 quickly, and then you can chime in where you see fit, and then we could talk about kind of how we're eating right now. Do you think that's a good plan? No?
Go ahead.
Okay. So we talked about kind of things that are in the middle of the spectrum. On the ends of the spectrum
we did talk about a little bit of extremes.
but vegan.
Yeah.
And then the carnivore diet.
Yeah.
So vegan, from what I understand, is no animal-based products.
Correct.
So, and I know that can be a charged diet because there's some dogma surrounding that. And then, but I will say, like, largely they're basically eating plant-based products, and that's it, right?
Well, so I was vegan for 10 years. I have a lot of experience in that world. I was a vegetarian before that, and now I'm not. And that's, that's fine for me. So if you're eating a vegan diet, like you said, you're not eating any animal plant-based anything. So no eggs, no meat, no dairy, no cheese, no fish, none of those things, because they all come from living beings. Anything that comes from a living being.
Yep.
So you eat plant-based foods. Now there's 2 categories here. There's strict vegan, and then now there's a new category that's come up called plant-based, which is primarily plant-based. But if your grandma makes you a cake and there's eggs cooked into the cake, you're not going to be like, no, thank you, I'm not eating that. You just eat the cake.
Yeah.
So I like that little bit of flexibility. That's really nice. That's more what I was, honestly, because I was vegan most of the time. And then if someone made me something, I would just eat it because the relationship of that person meant more to me than that dogma associated with my diet.
Right.
So you can eat a vegan diet and be pretty healthy.
Yeah.
You can, but you can also eat a vegan diet and be really unhealthy.
Right. I mean, because Oreos are vegan. So.
Oreos are vegan, right? So that again goes back to what we talked about with paleo way back earlier in the podcast. Nutrient density, nutrient quality matters.
Yeah.
So like, what's his name? The athlete that you were talking about. Rich
Roll?
Rich Roll is a vegan athlete.
Yeah.
He does a great job of balancing these things to make sure that he gets enough nutrients to fuel his body effectively.
Yeah. What I've seen is that with Rich Roll's a great example of someone that is doing it right. Mm-hmm. He's an ultramarathoner, pretty competitive, high level ultramarathoner. And he and his wife have a vegan cookbook, but he's like dialed in with his supplements. The dude's shredded and has a decent amount of muscle mass. He doesn't look emaciated or like sunken in cheekbones or anything like that. But he's like got a lot of science behind it. So he's testing his numbers all the time. He's making sure all his vitamins are on point. He's supplementing with what he needs to supplement on. So I think from what I have seen, you can do vegan in a healthy, sustainable way, but it's more complex.
It is a whole lot more complex.
It's way more complex
than they want you to think.
Than even pulling off keto or paleo. But I would, again, a lot of times if people have switched from, if you're starting at the standard American diet and you switch over to anything that has the restriction of cutting out processed foods and a lot of garbage. And a lot of times, if you're cutting out meat products, that means you're not eating cheeseburgers. You're not, so it's going to cut out a lot of crap.
If you're not eating animal products in general, you're not going to eat tasty cakes. There's eggs, there's milk, there's dairy. You know what I mean?
It cuts out a lot of garbage.
Yeah.
You can still
100%.
find vegan garbage, like, there's a lot of like I'm sure Doritos are probably vegan and like all of that. So it's, well, I don't know if the cheese product, whatever cheese powder they're putting.
Who knows if that's real cheese?
Who knows if that's real cheese? So you can do it. It's just more complex. And a lot of folks that engage with that type of diet have a moral objection to like meat and cruelty to animals and things like that, which I
totally agree with too.
I'm really on board with factory farming being a terrible thing.
Agreed.
So I line up actually really alongside a lot of their tenets as far as like treating of animals and stuff. I do, but anyway, we don't digress into that. But anyway, I just want to say, like, if you started at standard American and you switch over to vegan, you're probably going to have some immediate like
positive effects.
Correct.
Now,
absolutely. Whether or not you're going to have to dial it in and making sure all your numbers are good, but that's true of all these diets as well.
Yeah.
It's just more complicated than if you did keto and paleo, because the bioavailability of some of those nutrients and meats is a lot easier than the amount of broccoli you'd have to eat to get the protein out of it is very intense.
Yeah, so that question of, I mean, having been vegan for so long, you get that question all the time. Where do you get your protein? Protein doesn't matter as much on a vegan diet as people think.
Yeah.
Lots of different plants have lots of different amounts of protein. The trick is bioavailability of that protein, density of that protein, and fats actually matter more in a vegan diet. Getting good, healthy fats to be stable and well balanced and have good hormones and have good blood sugar than it does to matter about protein. Now, I want to touch on something here too real quick. You're familiar with the Weston A. Price Foundation?
Yeah.
So Dr. Price basically did a whole bunch of studies, for those who are listening who might not know, I'm not going to stay too long here, don't worry, on healthy diets. And he was started out as a dentist. And
he's the guy that looked at people's mouths, right? Yeah.
Yep, to look at people's mouths and structure and healthy teeth. And he basically found that, now this was years ago, that there was no sustained culture that was purely vegan, long-term, as a whole culture. And I would agree with that. I say as a culture, historically speaking, there has not been a sustained capacity to be a vegan. I will say bioindividuality exists and technology exists now where certain individuals might thrive and do great on a vegan diet, a purely plant-based diet. It's possible. It is challenging. You have to be careful to make sure you're getting all of the nutrients that you need and that your body is able to do that. One of the problems for me that I ran into in my experience of being vegan is that I lost the ability to produce good stomach acid.
Yeah.
So is that okay that I talk about this here?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's fine.
So I lost the ability to produce stomach acid. Some of that was a lot of stress. My body was on major stress mode for a long time. And when you're in stress mode, you can't produce stomach acid effectively. But another factor that is hard to get around for myself personally with why I'm no longer vegan is when you don't have animal sources of protein, whether that's eggs, whether that's dairy, whether that's meat, fish, whatever that is, it's very hard to get what we call a deep acid expression in the stomach. It's really hard to get a dense enough type of plant-based protein exclusively, which triggers that really big acid expression. And over time, you produce less and less acid because, quite frankly, plants require less acid to break down.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's where I look at that adaptability of the human body. You want to be able to burn fats and carbs very easily. Fats when you've fats when you've got fats, carbs when you've got carbs, protein, dense protein when you've got dense protein, and plant-based protein when you've got plant-based protein.
Yeah.
So having that spectrum perspective.
And then I'll throw this out
Sure.
there just in a very, if you're a vegan because you have a thing against cruelty to animals and so forth, totally legit.
Totally
I get it. But like there's a way around it. If you have really well-raised chickens that are
your chickens.
they can
You
even be
pet them,
your
you
chickens.
care for them.
They can be,
They lay eggs whether or not they're fertilized.
Yeah. So just don't get a rooster.
Yeah.
And they're not like an aborted chick. They're gonna make the eggs regardless. Right. It's a cruelty-free, morally free, delicious animal protein that you can have that's like complete, provided the chickens have a pleasant home.
Yeah.
And are like, you can have a nice yard for them. They can be free ranging. They can eat all the bugs in your yard and all kinds of stuff. And that's a really nice, also cricket protein's been really popular. It's another way of, sometimes people don't have as big of an issue
wouldn't eat those.
doing I'm just saying it's a cricket, so it's like less of a thing. But anyway, eggs are a really good option, particularly one that are raised with really healthy, happy chickens.
Yep, I totally agree with that. I think that's awesome.
So I think we covered that pretty good. Now this is a newer diet that I've been hearing a lot about on Joe Rogan and some other places. So this is the carnivore diet, where we just talked about vegan. Now
This is the totally
carnivore is
exact
the opposite end of the spectrum, where it's all they eat is meat, and it's usually like pretty fatty meats too. And actually, Jordan Peterson is pretty close on a carnivore diet right now. I think he's eating some vegetables, but the pure carnivore diet is just meat.
Just meat, any kind of meat, and eggs. They allow eggs and dairy, I think, too.
Yeah, but they're that's what the diet is.
Yeah.
And from what I understand, they're not that restrictive on where you're getting the meat from,
No, they don't
which
care.
again is where I have an issue, because people are going to like Costco and Sam's Club and just buying like bulk, beef orders and whatever. And a lot of that's factory raised beef. That again, supporting something that I'm not a big fan of.
Right, and that's where people get into different perspectives. For us, our perspective is we want nutrient-dense, happy animals and vegetables and all these things that are really good quality in that way. But some people just care about the, for lack of a better term, the macronutrient profile. Is this a protein? Is this
Right. So now it's relatively new. So I don't know how much science is really they're kind of,
there's not much science behind
not much
it.
science. We know one person that tried it and then kind of was like meh. I know a couple other guys that are trying it, but it seems like other foods tend to creep back in because it's like palate fatigue.
Yeah,
you
for
just
sure.
end up eating so much ground beef or so much steak where you're just like, man, I'm it's a little intense. So that's kind of what's out there right now, and it's a little popular, but I think that's kind of knowing all of this and the things that we have chatted about. I thought we could maybe just go over what we're shooting for in our own diet currently.
I have two thoughts real quick about the carnivore diet. So three actually. So the first one is a little technically before the carnivore diet. Most of these diets that we have talked about include a lot of plant-based materials to begin with. Even keto is very high in salads and leafy greens and those types of things. So that no one is in question that eating higher amounts of unprocessed plant-based materials is healthy. That's across the boards.
Right.
The only one here is with this carnivore diet, they say, there's no plant material at all. It's just meat. And there's all kinds of, arguments for it. Like you said, there's not a whole lot of actual research. But I will say, I've had a couple of clients in my office who, this is why I talk about bioindividuality so strongly, that is all they can eat is meat.
Interesting.
Because one person in particular I can think of, she has an uncommon condition called oral allergy syndrome, which is basically the doctor's way of saying, we don't know why you're experiencing this symptom, but here's the name we're going to give to your collection of issues. And what that is every single time she eats any plant-based material, whether that's a grain, a piece of bread, whether it's, a piece of lettuce or a pickle, she breaks out in hives, all in her mouth and her esophagus. Hives.
Yeah.
Horrible. Like it's not at all a pleasant experience, but when she eats meat and fat, she does not have that problem. So something's going on with her bioindividual chemistry, her genes, whatever it is. So for her, that's a wonderful diet. That is pretty much the only way she's going to be able to get nutrients into her body to begin with. So, and you mentioned Jordan Peterson. He was dealing with some really significant autoimmune conditions, and going to a carnivore diet has significantly reduced his symptom and reactivity of his body to have this autoimmune problem in the first place.
Yeah.
So for me, any of these diets that are more extreme, keto, extreme high fat, low carb, extreme high carb, low fat, extreme meat only, plants only, a lot of these diets can be used as a therapeutic tool to help people through situations. Right?
Yeah.
When you're on a carnivore diet, for example, that is almost, to me, that's a really hardcore elimination diet. You only have one source of nutrients. Your body can calm down if it's reactive to any of these other types of foods because all you're doing is this meat.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it can be helpful for a period of time. There's not enough research to say how it is long term. I don't think that's not going to come for a while until people have been doing it for a long term. And there are some guys, like I forget his name, who did it for over a year. He just eats meat. Remember he was on Joe Rogan?
Yeah, I forget that dude's name.
But
he's the forefront of that. He's like the guy leading the charge. That's because he's the one trying to get people to sign up so that they can
do some more
tests and research. So,
but even him, he's done it for a year. That's not a long-term study. Not really when you're talking about longevity over a lifetime.
Yeah, and he's had 40 some years of eating, not just that.
Right.
So it's like a lot of layers of plant-based material and other stuff in there too. So.
Yeah, so I did want to say any of these diets can work great on the short term. They can work great on the long term. But I personally believe in flexibility.
Yeah.
Right? And having the adaptability to eat all kinds of different things and still feel good and still digest it and utilize those nutrients appropriately.
Yeah. And then we've done, a lovely episode on digestion, which is like regardless of what you're eating,
you have to be able to absorb the nutrients.
The good practices of sitting down, chewing your food, all of that stuff, taking your time. But, we have experimented with a lot of these diets. Probably the only one I really haven't messed with significantly is vegan and carnivore, but I've done a lot in between.
Yeah.
So where when you start experimenting a little bit with your diet, I like to start paying attention to more of like how I feel.
Yep, absolutely.
Where's my energy at? And then, for me, because I do a lot of physical training and running and things like that, where I'm pushing my body, I can really tell. That's why I do the things that I do. A lot of the running that I do or jujitsu, it calls me on my bullshit.
Yeah.
I can't fudge the numbers on that.
Right.
I can't like phone it in. Like
you feel it.
When you run, the pace is the pace, the distance is the distance. You're either fast or you're slow, and like there's no like it was kind of all right. And same with jiu-jitsu. You either get tapped or you submit the guys. So it's like very unambiguous. The only place I could fudge it a little bit is in my strength and conditioning, just like how hard I push it.
Oh, that's true.
Because I don't do like CrossFit or anything where I'm competing with other people, because that is a bad
Place for you to be at the moment.
It's just not conducive to Jeremy not getting injured.
Yes.
So I'm too competitive with that stuff. But and it just because CrossFit's way too much fun.
Yeah.
But where I've kind of, well, what I'm doing right now, some things that I'm experimenting with are intermittent fasting.
Fat fasting.
But it's more like fat fasting.
Yeah, you're fat fasting.
It's
You're not
really
intermittent fasting.
Well, I guess I'm fasting from carbohydrates.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you call it a carb fast. I feel like that might be more accurate. But basically, what I do is when I get up, I have some water with some salt in it, and then to kind of rehydrate.
A little pinch of salt. Water doesn't taste salty.
Yeah, it doesn't. Shouldn't taste like the ocean. But then I do my coffee, French press, delicious backyard beans. Shout out to those fellas. And then I do, now my new jam is I do a little bit of heavy cream and then a couple squirts of the emulsified MCT oil from On It. I really like the vanilla. And then I will drink that through till lunch, which is about noon. So all I'm getting is fats, really. And then
So what you're doing is you're staying in ketosis.
Yep.
You've fasted all night long from dinner time whenever you finished eating that evening until morning when you wake up, and the first thing that you eat, quote unquote, is this fatty coffee that you just described until lunch.
Yeah. And if I wanted to be a little bit crazier with it, what I would have to do is basically not have anything except water until noon.
That's not crazy. That's intermittent fasting.
That would be intermittent fasting is what I'm saying. If I went a little more strict, but I found right now it seems to be working all right. If I run into a situation where I need to drop some more LBs, I'll mess with the full on intermittent fasting. And then I have my smoothie, which I prepackage. We've talked about ad nauseum on this show already. But that's that's usually what I have at lunch. And then I usually have I'll have an RX bar or something else, or one of those meat bars that we have,
Mission meats.
which are good. And that'll kind of get me through to coming home. And then I need to eat another meal, at, in between work and working out. It's usually I'll do eggs and bacon or, with some cheese and some sauerkraut on there, stuff like that. And then my new jam is, because I started running, I've had an issue where I need more carbs really.
Yep.
And, if I don't pre-make some stuff, I'll end up drinking beer because it has a lot of carbs in it and it's awesome.
And it hits you so quick.
Oh,
so
it's
if you
great.
need that boost.
It's great, particularly after a workout. Oh, if anyone knows what I'm talking about, you go on a long run and you hit a nice beer on the way back.
Yeah.
Woo, it's good.
When you've come home, not on your drive
Right. Sorry, it's not in my water bottle waiting for me in my truck. But so I've been making. You suggested my brother to do loaded baked potatoes, and that sounds awesome. One of my jams is making potato skins. Yep. So I was like, well, if I do potato skins, but I leave a little bit more of the potato in there, it'd be sweet. So I dude, I'll have to take a picture of it and post it sometime. They're pretty awesome.
You totally should.
You've had them, but I
have had them. Yes, they're delicious.
But I do I've got a whole method. I've got it nailed down now, and I do a massive batch on Sunday. But it's loaded with bacon, red onion, chives, awesome cheese, and then I'll cook them all off, and they're awesome. And then I also baste the base and the inside with bacon grease and broil it so it's nice and crispy. Add some spices, and then when I eat them, a lot of times I throw some nice sour cream on top of that with some other chives, and it is awesome.
Beautiful.
And that's kind of what I will eat. I try and eat them at night post workout, because that's, from what I've heard from people like Ben Greenfield and stuff, if you're going to have a lot of carbohydrates post workout at night, it's one of the best times to have them.
One of the best times. Yep.
So, and then if I nail that, what I just laid out, if I do that correctly during the day, the next day when I'm just waking up and having coffee, I'm not crazy hungry because I've got enough nutrients.
And you actually, that what you just described sounds pretty darn close to keto. It's definitely, at the very least, your ratios of fat, carb, protein, your fat is your highest amount.
Yeah, I might have to trim back some of the fruit that I put in my smoothie. I don't put a ton of fruit, but it's a decent amount. But
well, and with keto too, some people, there's the general rule of thumb where you've got 10% or less of carbohydrate, your calories from carbohydrates.
Yeah.
But some people who are more athletic burn through those carbs more quickly. So you have more flexibility where if we tested your blood, for example, you're probably still in ketosis, even though you're eating more carbs because your body knows what to do with both of those things.
Yeah. Yeah. And I will say I am in a period where I need to dial it in a little bit more as far as, I actually do want to drop weight because I've got some goals with running and I'm just too heavy to huck my fat ass around the Lake Alina right now at the speed I would prefer. Which it's really, I'm doing things that are kind of like counter. Jiu-jitsu is really nice to have weight.
Yeah.
If you can,
True.
if you're strong enough to move it around, which I am. So, but then running, it's better to be lighter.
Yeah.
So it's like, I'm trying to find the blend and then finding the right amount of calories to have during the day where I don't feel too beat up and then.
Yeah. Or too hungry when you wake up in the morning.
And that's the problem when I go on the runs. I'm so hungry when I wake up. I end up sometimes don't make it till noon on my coffee or have to.
Which is okay.
But
Listen
anyway.
to your body. So that sounds great. That is a version of intermittent fasting, I would say. Technically, as soon as you put anything in your body that has any kind of calories, you've broken your fast.
Yeah.
So black coffee, water, tea, those types of things don't count as breaking your fast. If you're true intermittent fasting, so this is it's not a diet because the foods you eat don't matter according to this paradigm, but it's a way of eating that works really well for a lot of people. Traditionally, intermittent fasting is you eat for a time window and you fast for another time window. And you could eat for 12 hours and fast for 12 hours. You could eat for 10 hours and fast for the rest of that time. Typically, you do an 8-hour fast and an 8-hour eating window and a 16-hour fast. That's what typically, when you think of intermittent fasting, that's what that looks like.
Yeah, and they also call it time-restricted eating.
Yes, or time-restricted eating.
Other label that's getting thrown around.
Mm-hmm. Same thing, same concept, where you consume the bulk of your calories in a shorter amount of time. Now, the common misconception is that you're supposed to be restricting calories as well.
Yeah.
But not really. You shouldn't be skipping breakfast and just eating lunch and dinner as you would normally. I mean, some people can do that and that works well for them, but the idea is to eat the same amount of calories as you would that your body needs in a shorter window of time.
Right. So from what, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I heard this on, Rogan did a really good podcast with Rhonda Patrick. I think it was the most recent one, where he was saying she was saying that because you're taking 16 hours off, it's giving your digestion in your digestive tract that 16-hour break before it has to process anything else, and that's huge piece of why it's beneficial.
Well, and correct. And part of what happens when your body's not focused on digestion is you can focus on rejuvenation and healing and autophagy, which is where cells eat other cells that might become sickly.
Right. Okay. Okay.
So you do a lot of repair and almost maintenance, housekeeping sort of things when you're not worried about digestion.
Yeah.
And if you want to talk about historically from a paleo perspective, if you want to go all the way back.
Or ancestral. Yeah.
Or from an ancestral, primal perspective, humans did not have consistent access to food. Not usually, not in the way that we would think about it. Like I said, we go through periods of feasting and famine. Our bodies are great when we're adaptive like that. And if you give yourself a fasting window that's 16 hours, but you're not fasting, like I said, for the point of calorie restriction, your body gets used to saying, when I don't have food in my system for fuel, I've got to get into my reserves.
Right.
I burn my body fat, the stored energy that I've put away for times of fasting. Intermittent fasting is a phenomenal way to balance your blood sugar.
Yes.
Once you can get over the first few days, you are going to feel hungry. This is the only time I always say, eat when you're hungry, stop when you're full. If you're beginning a period of intermittent fasting like this, or trying to start a program of intermittent fasting, you are going to feel hungry. Your body's going to say, I want the sugar. Give me that sugar. Sugar from any type of carbohydrate. Your potatoes, for example, would be carbohydrate.
Yep.
So your body's saying, give me that glucose. And you're saying, no, I'm going to feed you. You're going to wait a couple more hours. You're going to get food. You've got to tap into your reserves. The first few days, your body's going to rebel. It's going to say, no, I want that. Give me the food. It's easier. But after a very short period of time, 2 or 3 days, you're going to start feeling really good. Mm-hmm. So I have fallen into this intermittent fasting. That's what I do a lot of times. I don't like to say that strictly, because if I'm going to go meet someone for coffee or have breakfast or whatever, I'm breaking my fast early. I don't care. It's fine. I'll eat for
Yeah.
more time during the day. But it's awesome because you don't have to, like I said, you don't have to restrict calories. You just eat real food. That's what I do. That's my philosophy. I don't particularly like to say I'm ascribing to keto or paleo or whatever.
Yeah.
Eat real food.
Yeah, eat real food. And then if you pay attention and you're not achieving your goals, that's when you start to kind of tweak things. And with the time restricted eating, I know from past experience, if I can cut off my eating quicker at night, like really eat between like, even if I did like noon and like 10 o'clock at night, even though that's a 10-hour window, because there's people that do 14-hour windows, 10-hour windows, 8-hour windows, whatever. And there's guys that do like a 2-hour window and just stuff their face in 2 hours.
I'm not that extreme.
Yeah. People get crazy with everything. But yeah, I know that works really well. If I can hold off eating like 2 hours before I go to bed, a lot of times. But then the issue is that I run into is that I train late, and then that becomes an issue. Is I don't get home from all the stuff I'm doing until like 9:30 or 10 o'clock, and then I'm pretty hungry at that point.
Right. Yeah, and I run into that too. That's why I fall into this pattern. I don't typically break my fast until like 1, 2, maybe 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
And you're drinking just black coffee.
Black
in the
coffee
morning.
and water.
Yeah.
And then I break my fast because I work until 8:30. A lot of times I don't get home until 8:30, 9 o'clock, 9:30 and eat dinner.
Yeah.
And for me, I mean, ideally you don't want to eat, like you said, super close to bedtime, but that's what I have available to me and that's what I'm going to do. It's real life for me.
Yep. Yeah.
Whatever.
I'm in the same boat.
You run into that.
So
it works great. I love it. It's awesome. But hey, some days I get hungry at 11. So I eat at 11 and then I just eat when I get home. It's whatever. It's fine.
Well, and I'll say one of the things that I've found with, I know you don't like calling them cheat meals.
Treat meals.
Treat meals, or I like calling them like feast meals.
Okay. That's a good one too.
This is just a theory that I'm working out roughly. And this is kind of like, we can maybe wrap this up pretty quick here.
Sure.
But one of the things I found, I pushed my body really hard one week. And I was running a lot, and it was kind of the first time coming back to running, and I just felt really depleted. And then I went and just made this monster meal, and we got all this food, and there was ice cream involved, lots of stuff, and I just stuffed my face. But I'll tell you what, like my body felt charged up the next day. Like it felt like I replenished all my glycogen stores, and everything was just like ready to go.
So I think they call those refeeds.
So I think that's kind of how I want to frame my cheat meals going forward is like a feast day, like, because that was very common ancestrally for a long time, is that you went from like a pretty restricted diet just because you didn't have access to a lot of food, and then say there was a successful hunt in your tribe, or fast forward to more of an industrialized agricultural setting, you had a feast where feasts were very common. You had a festival, something like that, where you had a huge abundance of food. Maybe there was a successful harvest or a special occasion or Christmas or whatever, and you just stuff your face. And I think there's something beneficial in doing that, of like overfeeding to the point of like, oh God, not all the time. I'm just, and I have no science behind this. It's just an inkling that I've had, and I've heard other people talk about it. I don't know if there's any studies behind this, but I'm going to start doing that with that in mind, that I'm going to overeat and stuff my face until I can't move, like once a week, provided I've done the level of training that I think warrants that.
Right. Well, then what that sounds to me is you've been operating then at a more significant calorie deficit through the rest of the week, and you're replenishing those stores during your feast time.
Yeah.
And even once a week, I think might be a little bit much for that level of feasting.
We'll find out.
We'll find out. We'll see. But hey, bioindividuality might work great for you. That's totally possible.
But, just to be clear, I'm not talking like just eating ice cream and stuff. I mean like real nutritionally dense food. Because what I found is even during the week, I don't eat to the point of being stuffed.
Right.
I used to do that all the time.
That's true.
You just ate and ate and ate, especially as a kid.
And a young man.
Yeah, you're just like, oh, I can't move. I don't really do that now. It's pretty moderate as far as like, I get maybe like 3/4 of a tank, but it's nice to just like, let's just shove as much in there as you can.
Yeah, I think that's fun.
But anyway, we'll see. So just loose theory, folks. We'll see if it works out.
Worth testing, I think. Worth testing it out. So I just want to, one last thing here before we totally wrap up.
Sure.
Talk about what do I say when I mean real food. I kind of touched on that, but I want to give a real life example of what I actually eat. And I don't eat very many grains in general, not for like any reason other than we just don't make them very often. We don't do a lot of rice. We don't do a lot. I don't ever eat oatmeal,
Yep.
those types of things. It's mostly plants and fats with a little bit of protein.
Yep.
So if I'll do some of the smoothie that you have, which is Swiss chard, kale, spinach, avocado, tomato, carrot. I forget what else is in there. There's a lot of stuff in there. Coconut milk, banana, strawberries, blueberries.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of plants, some good fats.
We're doing broccoli sprouts.
Yeah, we're going to be doing broccoli sprouts.
Doing
That's
that
going to be
today.
awesome. And then I do eggs and bacon quite commonly, or some of your potato skins. So there's more plants, and then fats, a little bit of protein. And that's really common for me. And then I'll have my treats with potato chips here and there and, some indulgences. That's great. But I don't do a lot of bread. I don't do a lot of pasta, but I do sometimes. Like a couple weeks ago, we had Vassar family dinner, and your mom made spaghetti squash and spaghetti and her meat sauce. It's delicious.
It's super good.
She stews the tomatoes.
Oh,
She
she's got
makes
it
it with
dialed
ground
in,
beef.
man.
She uses
Woo,
spicy
it's
sausage.
good.
Oh my gosh, it's awesome. And you know what? I do a lot of the spaghetti squash, and I do a little spaghetti. And it's
Yep.
like brown rice pasta or whatever. It's fine.
Yeah.
It works great. I
Well,
do very well with that.
And you and me have some plans.
We have some plans, some bread
Ooh,
plans,
man.
some sourdough awesomeness.
Yeah, I would love to get to the point where we're milling our own grain, and making our own pasta, and making our own bread.
Yeah,
That
whole
would be
grain. We're not refining that stuff or taking
Yeah.
any of that out of it.
Yeah,
But
it's going to be whole heirloom grain, burr or stone milled, and then made into sourdough bread or something. Ooh, it's going to be good.
it's going to be awesome.
So,
Yeah. So that's about it, I think, for popular diets. I think that was pretty good. Any
Yeah.
last thoughts, comments on any of them?
no, I mean, I would caution against getting too dogmatic about any one of them. And I always have an adverse reaction to anyone trying to get me on their team. Like, say that you're this, so you're one of us. It's like, settle down.
Yeah.
And I would just pay attention to how you feel. And then if you have, if you're struggling with one of them or a transition, just be really careful with how fast
Be very
you're changing
careful.
things.
If you've got red flags, listen to those red flags.
Yeah.
I say this to my clients all the time. Transitions should not be painful.
Yeah.
Because a lot of practitioners, people out there think that if there's no burn, there's no gain, right? Feel the burn from working out. Or detox. I should have a detox reaction. No, you shouldn't. If your body is doing things naturally and easily, you should not feel bad.
Yeah.
You should feel good.
Well, I think you can do some of these more strictly if you need to do something therapeutic or corrective.
Yes, correct.
But my attitude towards them is eventually you want to look at it from a sustainability
Yeah.
standpoint. What are the things that you can have, every day? What's the method of eating? Find something like, is it intermittent fasting? Is it time restricted eating? Is it, a carb fast? Is it, and then
Is it a fat fast? Those
Yeah.
can be helpful too.
and then always moving towards the highest quality of food that you can. So, and I that's been, I have some thoughts and projects that I want to do and things I want to pursue, like hunting and things like that are all related to food. Just regardless of all the fads and things that come in and out, if you try it and then you're struggling or you feel like your health is in question, I would highly recommend talking to someone like you, like Serina,
Give me a call.
to hit her up and she can be a nice guide through that process so that you're not swinging in the dark there.
Yeah. And I do want to say that that's really great advice. And I also want to let people know, there is no one-size diet fits everybody. Regardless of what, sometimes people get really dogmatic, like you said, and this is, if there was one-size diet fits every single person, we would have come up with that as a culture millennia ago. Long time ago.
Yeah.
The world would have adapted so that was our food source. People are bio-individuals. I think that's very true. Now, there's no one-size diet fits all, and there is no one-size diet fits you for all time.
Right.
I want to emphasize that too.
Reason a season, a lifetime.
Reason a season, a lifetime. There are ebbs and flows. There's a concept of eating seasonally. What's in season right now is what you should be eating. Things fluctuate, and that's okay.
Yeah.
A lot of us, and I felt like this for a long time too, we want to just know what's the right thing to eat. What's the right thing to do? And just give me the list of do's and don'ts, because then it's easy.
Yeah.
But you know what? Life is fluid. It's not black and white. We want it to be black and white. It's so much easier, but it's not, unfortunately. Fortunately, also, because then you get to taste a wide variety of things and try all kinds of different foods.
Yeah.
You know?
And I also think it's acknowledging that there are outliers and to not base your decisions on outliers, which is another thing I've seen in the fitness world, because they'll pick some friggin' gorilla and be like, oh, what does he eat? Then I should eat that. It's like,
Maybe.
But
Maybe you need to tweak it. Maybe not at all.
But just like, don't base it on the freaks, because there's some people that can eat whatever. Courtney DeWalter, she's she ran the Moab 240, and she smoked she eats like beer and nachos.
Yeah.
Ultramarathoner, crushed the nearest competitor who was, most of them were dudes.
Yeah.
By like
more than 2 hours.
It was, she was ahead of him by over 20 miles.
Wow.
It was bananas. She smashed it.
Yeah, and that's an outlier situation.
Yeah. So anyway, just don't base all your decisions on like the one person you know that can eat cake and French fries all the time and is fine. So, because that's just one thing I've seen.
Yeah.
Where
and you don't know over time how your body's going to respond.
Correct.
That's why, like, I was vegetarian, then I was vegan, and now I'm an omnivore, and a high-fat omnivore, so to speak. Not high-fat is specifically being keto or whatever. It's fluid. I try to be more fluid with that and have less restrictions. Some people need that. Like you said, if you're in a therapeutic situation, you're really trying to lose weight, or you're trying to balance your seizures, or whatever you're trying to do, you might want to go to a more strict period of time until you've done that healing work, and then become more flexible. I'm about being flexible.
Big fan of being like the hybrid, like we were saying. That and for me, and what I've been getting when I felt the best is when I'm fat adapted and also can burn carbs really easily.
Yeah.
So.
And last closing thought, I don't like the idea of saying that food is bad, that there is a bad food.
Yes, let's touch on this. Yeah.
I dislike that concept with all of my being. because that puts guilt and shame on you for eating. And food is food. It is not a being to heap guilt and shame on you.
Right.
Food does not praise you when you eat it. Food does not shame you when you eat it. There is no such thing as good food and bad food. There may be better amounts of certain foods or worse amounts of certain foods, but even sugar in and of itself is not bad. It's not evil. Sugar is not evil. Right. I don't care what people tell you. It's not.
Yeah.
You can eat sugar from time. You can eat ice cream. You can eat cheese, nachos. You can eat, what are some other things? Cheeseburgers, potato chips. You can drink beer. It's about how your body interacts with the food. It's about how you feel when you eat the food. If you feel bad, okay, well then you feel bad after eating the food. It does not mean the food was bad.
Right.
It does not mean you have to say never again.
Yes.
No, okay, qualify. Yes. If you have a peanut allergy, you're going to die. If you eat peanuts, don't eat peanuts. It's a different situation. But I like taste peanuts. Don't do that. That's a different situation.
Just you go into anaphylactic shock. Oh.
Yeah, no, that's not what I'm trying to say. I'm just trying to say, one of the things I try really, really, really hard to do in my office for all my clients is to remove that guilt and shame component. We've grown up with a huge amount of that. You're bad if you eat this. You're good if you eat that. Yeah. No, food is food.
It's morally ambiguous.
It's morally ambiguous.
So, and I think that, and there's so much guilt and shame, like you just mentioned, of like, even I've gotten used to calling them cheat meals, is when I eat off my normative path of eating that,
divergent meal would be more accurate.
Feast meal, whatever.
Yeah.
But like a lot of the food, and even, I mean, I know we just been smashing on processed food, but like they've come up with some ridiculous stuff that tastes amazing.
If that's your only fuel source, then
right. And it's also how often you're having these things, and that, that can be applied to many other substances as well. But but if you have something where you really, really enjoy it and you have it on occasion and it means a lot to you, like that can be very beneficial too.
Absolutely.
Because we're trying to, and I think we're hopefully getting close to this on this podcast, is contextualizing these diets and these choices and things in real life. Because I think when people sign up for something, they're like, I'm doing keto. If they break keto, they're like, I'm a piece of shit.
Yeah.
And it's like, dude, unless you're on death's door and like this is the only thing that's going to save you,
situation.
it's very unlikely it's going to have
Yeah.
the kind of impact that you are, putting on your shoulders. So like, and I used to be I'm a little heavier than I want to be right now, but I'm like, I used to be a legit chubby kid and I had a lot of hang-ups about food, and I'd always like go to sugar and eat cookies and stuff and then not only feel bad from the food, but also feel bad from all the guilt and shame I heaped on myself. So that's not really helping you out either.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I like what you said about ascribing to this diet, and if I don't eat keto, then I'm a piece of shit. Like, people feel that way, and I have so many clients say to me, "Well, this is not sustainable. I can't eat paleo is the big one, because paleo is probably the most popular, the most widely used term / diet nowadays."
Yep.
Well, I can't do that. How am I supposed to go out to eat with somebody if I can only eat these things? And I say, well, eat whatever you want when you go out to eat. One meal's not going to make any difference. You go out with your friends, you haven't seen them in 10 years, get drinks, get those nachos, eat the dessert. That's not going to ruin your diet. It's not going to ruin your body.
Yeah.
Enjoy that. That relational component is so important as well. I had a client recently who was asking me, she's very, very, particular in a good way. She knows how to achieve her goals. She's got her list and she follows her list, and it's great. But she asked me, she was concerned, and not in like a terribly frightened way, but concerned, what if I did this and I had this kind of, sprouted bread and my fried egg and my bacon and my fermented sauerkraut pickle, whatever, and then I did half a croissant on top. Because our family does croissants on Sunday. Ooh. I was like, honey, that sounds amazing. You
awesome.
Go for it.
Yeah.
That sounds beautiful.
Yeah,
really?
yeah.
That's okay? Yes.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah.
It's totally okay. Yeah. No guilt and shame. I'm all about removing that.
And we keep extending this because we're having fun. But in the guilt and shame realm, if you are a concrete sequential person that is super disciplined and is very good about staying on one of these diets, I would just plead with you to not be so judgmental of people that aren't doing whatever diet it is that you're doing.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Judging others for like, I'm eating keto, so I'm better than you kind of a thing. And you see people, eating less optimal foods, we'll say, and being judgmental toward that doesn't help anyone either.
Yeah, it doesn't. That's what we talked about, being dogmatic. I've tried really hard to not be I don't even know if I like that term, but judgmental, harsh with people who don't ascribe to the same dietary protocols that I have had. Even back when I was vegan for 10 years, I cannot tell you how many people were like, what? How can you be vegan? You're so nice. Not to bash vegans. There's a lot of really nice vegans, but they were shocked because the only experience that they had with people who ascribed to a strict diet, which at the time was popular, was vegan.
Yeah.
It was like, well, shame on you for eating meat. How could you possibly eat this in my presence? And I was never like that, because I know that people can, what's that comedian say? What you eat doesn't make me shit.
No, that's a Jay-Z quote. Oh. What you eat don't make me shit. So,
yeah. It's like, you get to make your own choices. I'm not here to judge you for your choices. I have not been in your shoes in your life. I've been in my shoes and in my life. And this is what works for me. And that's okay.
Yeah. So try it out. See what works.
Be kind to people, right?
Yeah,
what you say.
Yeah. Be kind. So, all right. I think we nailed it though.
Yeah. Good show, man.
It's good. Solid performer all around. All right, guys. We'll see you in the outro.
And that is it for us, folks. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed that episode. We really enjoyed having our conversation about these diets. It was pretty fun. For show notes, full show notes and links and all these types of things, you can find that on our website, which is thepainterandthepixie.com. You can also go to follow us on Instagram for fun show notes and updates and some things throughout the week at The Painter and the Pixie.
So that is going to do it for us this week, folks. Appreciate you guys listening and or watching, for those on the YouTubes. So in the meantime, relax, be kind to one another, and we will see you in the next episode.
Bye.
See you.
Amazing.